Many businesses in Vermont have a strong connection to the past. It's quite common to see Vermont businesses with ties to industries hundreds of years old. But one Vermont company is connected to an industry that's not just hundreds of years old, but thousands of years in the making. Blackthorn Forge in Marshfield has roots that run deeper than most, with an old-school approach to blacksmithing that some say has been around as long as fire itself. Blacksmith Steve Bronstein, founder of Blackthorn Forge, is an interpreter of the past. In a converted dairy barn, Steve and his faithful crew of one create new twists on old classics, and they've developed a business that spreads across the country and the world.
A staple in Marshfield is gone.
A well-known blacksmith shop burned to the ground overnight. Alexi Rubenstein reports.
It was a startling discovery for drivers headed down Route 2 in Marshfield Wednesday morning.
So it was pretty much on the ground when we got here.
The old cow barn turned blacksmith studio gone, a smoldering ruin in its place. Steve Bronstein's Blackthorn Forge went up in flames around 11 p.m. Tuesday. Officials say an employee was in the shop and had just lit the propane-fueled forge.
He had his back turned and he heard a big whoosh, and he turned around and the whole front of the building was involved.
Steve Bronstein, the forge's owner, is traveling overseas and couldn't talk to us. But 4 years ago, we visited the shop.
That'll go there.
In addition to menorahs and other Judaic art, his specialties include clocks and various animal sculptures. He told us it's a 21st century take on old methods of creating art. Friends of Bronstein tell us that the building was insured, but there's still no word yet on whether he plans to rebuild.
My wife and I had a opportunity to go to Cuba for a salsa dancing workshop. So 10 of us were going. We had saved up. It was this great trip. And the second morning, like 7 o'clock in the morning, there's a knock on my door. The leader of the trip had her cell phone. I needed to talk to my daughter. It was a little heart-stopping moment. She's on the phone crying, "Dad, the shop, there was a fire, your shop's gone." And so of course my first response was, to be Dad. So I'm reassuring her. And I keep it together. It's like, it's just a thing. Anybody hurt? Nobody's hurt. Everybody's okay. And she's just bereft, just bawling. And so I keep it together. And then finally she hangs up and I start bawling, tell my wife. And so we're just freaked out. And it's like, all right, what do we do now? We're in Cuba. There's very little cell phone service, very little Wi-Fi. We don't really know what's going on. She wasn't able to give us a whole lot of information. And like, what do we do?
First it was, just see what I have. Go through the pile. See what could be salvaged. Kind of funny. Luckily, most of my business is selling to craft shops and galleries. And luckily, most of my orders were on at the computer, and the computer melted, but all my backups were online. So I had important information. I did lose my design books, all my dimensions, all my methods that I've kept, my shop drawings, my shop procedures. They were lost, and we all sat down, me and my helper, and I called up some former employees and asked everybody just to try to remember whatever they could. At this point, I'm just accepting that it's not as efficient, but it's getting done, which at this point is good enough. I'm late on this order, but they know why. I have a good reason. It wasn't my dog ate my homework. There we go. 2 weeks, week and a half. I go to the New York Gift Show, which is a major trade show in New York City, which is really how I get my orders. I sell to craft shops and galleries around the country. And I don't have a booth. I don't have inventory. This is typical of the metal that went through the fire. And these were the straight pieces. And that's what we've been doing. We've just been slowly straightening all this work out. So we had, ash pile, I don't know. This high, Luke? About this high? That's pretty high. That high, maybe here, digging through all the ashes that were in the fire, sifting through everything like an archaeological dig, and finding all those things that we lost. So there's just buckets of, there was no separation at the time. But, what's hard is like going through the fire, this just looks like junk. These are tools. Like this tool, this is actually a tool. This is a ring that's sized just right for a candle cup that we make. So because we found that, I don't have to reinvent that product. There's jigs mixed in here. A lot of this is what it looked like when we pulled it out of the fire. And just slowly we're figuring it out. Yeah. Oh, look, I could use these doors for the show. That could be my table. Like, that's how we're running. This is how, it's like, oh yeah, this was in the barn. I can use that for the booth in New York. We'll paint it white and they'll never know. All of these pieces went through the fire. In fact, this one didn't get saved. That point's supposed to be elongated, but it got a little gnarly, and we may just leave it that way. This is the packing and shipping department now. So this is where we're cleaning and oiling things. Come on in. And this is my temporary office.
My father set me down and basically, I was trying to figure out what I want to be when I grew up, and I didn't have a clue. So he very wisely just said, well, what do you like to do? And we made a list. It was, being creative and being different, problem solving, something technical, getting dirty, I think was on the list, which is kind of funny. But when I was out in the world, it was kind of like I was holding up this list going, no, that's not it, that's not on the list. And that really, it clicked. There was the problem to solve of how do you make things? How do you learn how to be a blacksmith? There was the problem to solve, how do you make a living doing it? There's no manual, how do you do this? In college, I was a biology major, and that skill set was very helpful. It was the research project of, is it possible to be a blacksmith, and how does one go about it? And I started collecting data and coming to some conclusions about that. So the technique is kind of where I started. I didn't have a vision of what I make. I didn't have a style when I started. There was a point, I couldn't get into this craft fair. There was a very successful show, and I wanted to get in. You had a jury into the show. And the promoter said to me, when one of my blacksmiths dies, you can get in, which was just sort of an amazing phrase. But what she was saying was, I have enough people who do work like you're doing. And I was like, oh, okay, so there was actually an important message in there, as horrific as that statement was. And I was coming back from this show, having bombed. Well, I started thinking about clocks. And then what's a clock? And a clock, it's It's a functional object, and you justify its existence because of its function. But what is it? It's really a piece of sculpture that you justify its existence with a clock mechanism. So you could take any piece of sculpture and put a clock mechanism on it, and okay, you've got a thing that you can sell. So then the body of the clock was the sculpture. And that's where I started. So I got back into the shop, and then suddenly any squiggle, any gesture drawing could become a clock. And that's where I started. And at some point, there was a shift. And it was hard for me to, I cannot quantify where that moment was. But suddenly I was able to look at whatever I was making, and it looked like that was a blackthorn kind of thing. There are designs in my line that I still do from that initial burst of creativity. It's time to come up with a new line. My daughter she's 17, and she was smart enough at 3 in the morning when she got the call to call the right person, my friend Justin, who he came and swooped in and picked her up. They went out to the site and figured out what needed to be done. So the message that I got from Zoe, my daughter, was they're taking care of it, which is sort of amazing. So my first response was, okay, we are not going to go back. And I was in Cuba, and like, how many opportunities do you get to do that? This was going to be a Zen practice, how to be present. So we stayed in Cuba, we danced. It was actually a great place for me to be, to deal with this, because I had some remove. So I was looking at pictures on Facebook, and what I could see was, the shop was gone. But in the ashes, there was my anvil sitting proudly above the ashes, and there were my tongs and hammers and all the old tools that were irreplaceable and define me as a blacksmith. What's a blacksmith? Somebody who works at an anvil and forge. Those things I still have. And I was in Cuba, they don't have much. I was with people who really do without. We were in a restaurant one night, and somebody had knocked over a water glass and it had broken. And the place went silent. This tourist had dropped in. He said, I'm so sorry, I'll pay for it. And the waiter went, it's not the money. We can't get another one. And it was like, oh, they really don't have. So in my mind, okay, this is an inconvenience. And I'm not trying to be glib about it, but it's true. And then I came home ready to deal with it, and we started sifting through the ashes. And I was finding things. I was picking up candlesticks that had been ready to ship. There are the clocks, the birds, things that I had made. They were kind of okay. Dirty and a little worse for the wear, but they were made in fire. Fire much hotter than the barn fire was. I cleaned them up, re-oiled them, refinished them, shipped them out, and they look pretty great. I'm glad I'm a blacksmith. Glad I wasn't a woodworker or a textile artist. That would have been bad. So there was recovery to be had.
So today is Thursday. I leave for the show tomorrow. I'm almost ready. I have inventory. I don't have a booth. I don't have a sign. But I will. So that's what we're dealing with. Like, that's the show right there. It's like theater. Somewhere between theater and circus. The carnies come into town, erect the tent, make it look pretty, and for 4 days it has to look pretty, because the reality, so people don't want to buy from somebody whose hands are dirty. There's a blue-collar devaluation of what I do. When we go to the shows, all of this work that's dirty and maybe primitive and definitely unrefined, and then we take it and try to put it in an elegant setting, in a more refined situation, and I'll clean up and put on some city clothes, and
do the other side of my job, which is to sell the work. And it turns out it's actually easier to make things than to make a living making things. So it doesn't matter how beautiful the things are, how well we make them. In the next 4 days, when I go to the big city, if I can't sell it, then I don't have a job. So there's a little pressure. I actually think I'm close to the end of my list of things to do. Tomorrow shouldn't be too frantic. So there I am, out of touch, not sure what to do. And I would check in basically with the Facebook page. That's how I was able to communicate with my daughter. So, there's the first line, and, in the Facebook page is this, pictures of the fire and this terrible tragedy. And then what follows after that were the responses of my community. And I was simultaneously, experiencing the tragedy, and what a great thing. And I had always felt like a part of the community. I had the blacksmith shop in town, and it was a place that people went to. And I guess I knew it. But I never felt it. And this I felt. And, there's the help that I received from my neighbors. And then the help I received from the greater community. So there's both SURF, which is the Craft Emergency Relief Fund, which is, it turns out it's here in Vermont. It's a national organization that's set up to help craft artists who have crises. That, with the help from the GoFundMe page that my community had set up, was just amazing. And then Frog Hollow, Vermont State Craft Center in Burlington, all the sales that I had made through them, they were giving me the full amount. So all those proceeds went to me. So that was just very generous to them. And people that I didn't know, people who were customers of my galleries, who in their minds they knew me because they had pieces of my work. It's just rather amazing how far and wide that network is of people who care. And if there was any way that I could show my appreciation for what the community has done for me, it would be to rebuild, set up, open my doors, and be there to welcome my neighbors again. And when the shop is rebuilt, I'm looking forward to having a really great party.
So I led you astray. I'm not ready. What I'm trying to do is take stuff that came out of the fire and reuse it. So this is old metal that got burned. That's going to hang there. Do you have a tape measure? No, I said so. Where? Oh. Working without a plan. Now I have to drive to New York City and set up. When people say, oh, you do craft fairs, it must be so much fun. They are not around for this part of the job. All right, let me just walk around and see what I forgot. fear. We keep going, huh? I have a limited capacity for taking care of my wrinkles. It's the theater you do it.
It was very moving to get there to the show, to get there and to make it. For me, that was a milestone, to show up in some form and appear together. And everything that was in the booth had gone through the fire and had just been cleaned up. I didn't have the wherewithal to make new things, and I had enough things to at least have to present myself in a together manner. And that was my goal for the show. And this is an aside. But, so I had this vision of this sign that I wanted to make for my booth. And it just didn't work. And I was at the last minute trying to make it, and it wasn't working. And I had technical problems, and I was just upset. And so at the last minute, I just grabbed this piece of tin roofing, that had gone through, it was on the roof of the barn and had gone through the fire, and threw that in the truck. It's all I had, so I just in chalk wrote Blackthorn Forge and hung it up in the booth. And it looked great, and people were like, oh, where did you get that sign? And it fit the current gestalt of the Brooklyn DIY, retro, industrial, whatever it was. And like, no, this is not a recreation of anything. This was the real thing. And the lesson of the sign for me, again, it makes me weepy because the sign is both emblematic of the past and what happened, and it's the future in that I don't need much. I don't have to have this new fancy sign, that I can create with what I have, and it could be pretty great. All of my thoughts have been about the fire and how I'm going to deal with it and what am I going to do. And I'm not done with the past, but now I'm focusing on, all right, where am I now? And what am I going to do? And that's, that breathing room that I was offered by all the help that I was given. So where I'm at now is I'm kind of excited that it almost feels like when I started in the beginning and I made that list of what do I want to be when I grow up. And now I'm thinking about, here I am, I'm 60 years old, what do I want to do for the rest of my life? I do know that one thing that this new shop will be set up so I can more easily teach. If there's going to be a next generation of blacksmiths, they have to learn. So I like sharing what I do and what I know. There are these life lessons that you get in the shop. There's an immediacy to the work. You heat it up, you hit it with a hammer. It's simple. So there's not much to learn there. In some ways, it's not contemplative, it's not slow. You have to move quickly. So the moment you pull something out of the fire, you have to act. And the time of contemplating or planning or thinking is over. You have to move. And that's something that I really love about it. So it's that moment, and you hit the metal, and something happens, and you have to respond to it now. Because the metal's cooling off, and you don't have time to sit back and think about it. It's now. And then when it cools off, well, now you can think about it. And you think about it, you look at it, okay, and it's back in the fire, and it's heating up, and now you're planning your next moves.